Thank you, brother. We have time for comments and questions. Please raise your hand if you have a comment or question.
Lunch.
In the middle, please.
I had the benefit of hearing it.
I'm sorry?
I had the benefit of hearing it in Missouri. And so I wanted to kick you a softball right now. It makes my metaphors, I'm aware of that.
I did not plant this.
Could you maybe take a moment on something that you, on a slide that you didn't get a chance to get to, you want to share with us? Something you'd like to...
Not really. I simply, at the end, I go through that, the interaction, that Jesus had with this woman. And it was just as interesting to me how so much of what this notion of really intentional time and consideration of where the other person is, how that just kind of pops out. And so really the rest of what I didn't get to was really kind of examining those pieces. And so I just urge you to maybe now, with that sort of thought in mind, reread that story. We kind of tend, I think some of these things, and I do this all the time, there are certain particular points about certain stories that we almost always make, because this is what this proves, this is what this shows, and whatever. And Nathan kind of addressed this today. It's like, we got to back up from that, and it's like, what else is in there? How does this connect to the big story, as opposed to a very specific thing we want to prove? And again, going back to what this, the data shows about what people know about the Bible, we are, starting at a standstill. I mean, for a lot, and again, it's not being critical. It's just, the experience that they've had has not been this. And I will tell you this, I find particularly when people have been raised in the church throughout their lives, it's very easy to have this view. And to have this feeling of this is how, everybody knows this. And it's like we have the tribal language, we have all that stuff, and we know what we do is bizarre to most people. And if you've been doing it all your life, it doesn't feel bizarre. I remember the first time, that I attended a worship. It was very different than what I was used to. Guys jumping up all around, like leading songs. I'm like, what is going on here? Is anybody in charge? How did this happen? How did they know to do that? I'm really sitting there going, am I supposed to do, are they like going to ask me to do something? It was different. And I think for many of you, that's a different thing. And so being appreciative of like where I'll tell you a quick story. A very close friend of mine Stan's Catholic, and wonderful guy, wonderful family. And he called me one day. And because there's a lot of times in our discussions, he'll be asking, it's like, where did you find that? And, it's like, or there'll be others in our little, group that I worked with who are like, I was like a walking concordance, they thought, it's like, hey, could you tell me, where's that thing you said about just look it up. But, so Stan calls me, and he says, he was preparing something for his parish. And it was kind of along this line of like, how do we get kids, more enthused about the faith? How do we get, all these kind of things? And so I start down the path of talking to him about a variety of things that were, more about, we don't go to be entertained, we go, that kind of thing. This is about paying homage to our King, and so on. He stopped me and he said, look, Church of Christ is that's like graduate level. He said, I'm dealing with a different thing here. Now, I was stunned that he said that. I love the guy. And I was also, I mean, it was in many ways, I took it as a great compliment to say there is a seriousness that we generally give to what the Word says and how it shows up in our lives. And I think that's a huge compliment. But it also underscored for me, so what's the language we need to use? What's the positioning we need to use? How do we go about in organizing how we present what we believe in a way that's understandable? For little kids, you got to cut the food up so they can eat it. And sometimes we throw the steak out and just go, no, go after it. I don't have teeth. That was a weird metaphor, wasn't it?
Other questions or comments?
Thank you, sir. By the way, I've been at your house and your steak's excellent. And if you want to throw one at me, go right ahead. So I was wondering if you could make a few comments. This is the tip of the iceberg, obviously. There's so much more depth to this. But I've always been told, or at least in recent years, if I want to communicate with my grandparents' generation, they're about all gone, but we go see them and we sit down in their living room. If you want to communicate with my parents' generation, we call them on the phone. I'm 45 years old, and so if you want to communicate with my generation, you get on Facebook. If you want to communicate with the millennials, they have Facebook, but you have to communicate on Instagram or TikTok or even things I don't even know of, I haven't heard of. And then we have the younger generation, which are your grandchildren and my children. And so I'm very concerned about our young people and my children and their friends and developing a faith. But I'm also very concerned about our young preachers. And I'm concerned about our older leaders in the church. And I see a difference of how to go about things. Could you elaborate just a little bit on how do we balance older generations that are making most of the decisions in congregations and see value in evangelizing to them, and young evangelists who might not know how to communicate with people that are 40, 50 years older than them? And how do we get them all together on the same page so that we don't have people who are disgruntled and upset in a congregation because we've got this young preacher working with us and he's not doing anything? Or we've got this old preacher, the younger people looking, we've got this old preacher and he's just not doing anything. Mm-hmm. And the reality is they're working really hard. Yeah. So could you just kind of elaborate on that?
Well, to your first point about the communication thing, I agree. I mean, that's a different thing. I mean, for example, I come from an old sales background of like you go call people, you pester them, you go see them. I mean, it's like you don't send the proposal on email. You go see them. You sit in their office. And but I think at the end of the day, people are still people. And I think when we are willing to enter their world, the coffee shop, and sit with them and ask them really good questions about how they're doing and show that kind of engagement, I think the communication will be easy. Your other point about sort of those, I guess, the very high end and the kind of the low end in terms of age. I think some of us need to get better at being translators, where we can be a unifying force instead of just acknowledging the difference. Again, I go back to kind of people are people. And they're still wired up kind of the same way. A lot of the same fears and concerns and challenges that people face every day are the same ones that were around when Jesus was here. And they're just packaged up a little differently. Some of them are more obvious, some of them are not so obvious. But I think when we take the time to really invest, particularly in a personal way, person by person, and bring them in, I think we can have great influence. So I think, Brad, there's a good point in that by raising the awareness of the differences, I don't want that to be the stumbling block. I just want it to be an awareness. So I don't want us to think, well, because they're so different, well, look at that list of things that are so different. I can't do that. We can. And younger generations, and here's the good news, a lot of the younger generations show signs of desperately wanting mentoring and guidance, somebody to come alongside them. Because here's the thing, think about this for a second. People my age, and particularly people before, grew up faster. I mean, they were out doing stuff, working, interacting, going to war. I mean, doing things like that very early in life. And so there were a lot of interactions that happened, a lot of stuff that provided the basis for grit and an understanding of how the world works. And those are valuable lessons, and you don't learn them in a book. You don't learn them by watching them. You learn them by engaging. Well, if you haven't done that, and you get to this point in life, and you haven't had that sort of grit-building stuff happen, you need help in the form of somebody coming alongside and going, you can do this. It's interesting. Particularly with younger executives who I would say are in their like 30s, 40s, usually like whip smart, smarter than me. But a lot of times what they're lacking is just confidence. That somebody needs to tell them. And it's very rare you got to say, come back from the edge. You're out there too far. It's usually, you got to go. You got to dive in the deep end of the pool here. And you can do it. And somebody needs to say, not only can you do it, but I'm going to push you if you don't jump. Because you can do this. And what a wonderful opportunity to come alongside and just, be an encouragement to them to say, you can do this.
Glenn Osborne.
How are we doing on time?
About 12 minutes left of Q&A.
Oh, Roger was really good. I think one of the things. Well, let me tell you about a conversation I had with somebody one time. I was talking to them about purpose, about living and what we live for, and I said, "What's your purpose in life? What do you think life is for?" And he went, "Wow, nobody has ever asked me that before." And I said, "Well," I think about it all the time, and I'd like you to know Jesus because he's the one that gave me the answer about what my life was for. It's to prove what the will of God is, that which is good and acceptable and perfect. Romans 12, And so whenever you talk to people, there's a lot of times, I find it surprising that people don't ask that question, but that's just me. But something else happens too. I've seen a lot of people talk about work and personal evangelism and church being alive or dead or whatever. Mm-hmm. I kind of go, tell me about your God. And they want to tell you about their church. And I'm not downplaying the church because the church is glorious in its own way, for sure. But the point I'm getting at is that we've stopped talking about the nature of God and who he is and why we're not ashamed to call him God. There's a lot of people who have a lot of gods that you could be ashamed of them. They're not good gods. But our God is, in what way is he someone, in what way are we ashamed of our God? We can't be ashamed of our God. He's done everything to tell us about his goodness. And that's why in the Bible You taste and see that the good, this is good. This is something good. And people go into churches and they talk to people, and what they find out is about their God. I don't want this person's God. This grouchy person, and unfriendly, uncaring. Why would I want to go home with him? Why would I want to have him? We're ashamed of our God, and it's about time we stop that. We're not ashamed of the good word of God either. We should get to know God and be able to share that with people. I can guarantee you, I can go into a church, and within seconds, you can tell about what they think about their God and what God is according to them. And we've got to stop being ashamed of him. And I think that's what bothers me so much, is because he's my Father. And Jesus paid such a price. And it's no longer good news, but there are so many people who are hopeless and helpless and have nothing to live for in this godless world. And they don't know God, and they can't find him in a church. They can't find him with people who don't know him, who don't talk about him, or are not ashamed of him. So all I can say, brethren, is stop being ashamed of God.
I think there are maybe more opportunities today to share what motivates us and what grounds us than before. Because, particularly the last 3, 4, 5 years, you don't have to look far to see the angst and the turmoil that's in the world today. And you particularly see young people doing such weird, drastic things as a result of the fear and the discouragement that they have about the future. And how's that going to play out in my life? Do I even have an opportunity here? And I think when we can demonstrate a different view that is confident and hopeful, and we don't join the chorus of hand-wringers, that is an opportunity, because it begs the question, why aren't you worried about this? Do you watch the news? Yeah, I can watch it, but I know who wins. How's that? And I think that opportunity, bit by bit by bit, for us to demonstrate a confidence, not just about the future of the United States, but actually about eternity. And that impacts how we live. Those opportunities, I think, are greater today maybe than they've been for a long time.
Brother Greg Gay, then Sean Willis, and then we'll take a break before our next speaker.
Thank you, Roger. I wasn't at the Missouri study, but I did listen to it, so this is familiar and good. So I would say to those of us who are a bit older that we don't stop, living before we die. So I have in my possession, and I would ask for a show of hands, but I know there won't be anybody that goes up. I happen to have a perfectly good 8-track player and a collection of tapes that go with it. My family makes fun of me. Can you believe that? And including that amazing group, the Sons of the Pioneers, and their hit record, before it became on an 8-track, Cigarettes and Whiskey and Wild, Wild Women. You may not have heard that song. They were actually talking against such things. So with that collection of 8-track tapes and that 8-track player, once upon a time, that was absolute cutting edge. Maybe not the Sons of the Pioneers, but the equipment, absolutely cutting edge. But life didn't stop there. There's been so many things since then. We reach a point when we live that it's hard to stay up with what's going on. Some people of the older generation have not yet embraced the internet, like my mother refuses to. And many times we stop living before we die, and then we wonder why life is such a mystery around us. Now, I don't think it's appropriate for a 72-year-old like me to know the slang of my 14-year-old youngest grandson. I don't think that's appropriate for me to know all the words that are being used in school, but I at least need to know what life is like for him, and I can't do that without a relationship with him. At the same time, communication's a two-way street. So a dear older widow in a very large congregation sits in a row of widows, and she told me that she went to one of the young girls in her older teens in the congregation and said, "Why don't you ever talk to us? We would love to talk to you." But when the amen is said, the older women are ready to mix, to mingle, to visit, and the young kids go right around them and very rarely even speak. So it's a two-way street. And so to those who are young, adopt an old person. Just one. Adopt an old person, go up to them and actually want to know how they're doing. Actually get to know what their life is like for them every day. If they have if they've changed a light bulb lately, or if they need one changed. And for those who are older, when somebody young comes up to us, let's not presume that they're just horrible people who don't know anything about life. Let's presume they're trying to get to heaven the same way we are. But it's a two-way street, and we can't stop living. And so whatever we're doing as far as listening to music, if we do, or being entertained, if we are entertained, however we travel in the latest Tesla or a Model T, whatever we're doing, are we doing this in a way to glorify God, and are we trying to at least stay current? I'll give you one last example. My son-in-law's birthday happened within the last few weeks. His family went together and got him tickets for a concert. He opened the envelope and he cried. He cried. And I said, "What group is that?" "Well, I don't hear well." So I didn't understand what they said. I saw it in print. I still didn't understand what they said. It meant nothing to me. Absolutely nothing, but it meant the world to him. And so as we are entertained and as we have different generations, we will not have the same feeling and the same reaction towards everything that others have, and that's okay. But I could be in that moment because I love him, and I know he loves me. And knowing that that meant so much to him, it was very special to me, and I still don't have a clue who that group is.
There was that place on the Led Zeppelin 8-track Stairway to Heaven that it seemed like an odd place to switch from channel 3 to 4.
Sean Willis, there in the middle.
Really enjoyed that. I appreciate you taking that on. We live in a world that's spending a ridiculous amount of time and money trying to understand this. And the beauty is God and His Word has been well ahead of the curve. You know, working in an industry, technical sales, I think you mentioned it. You know, I work in a department that runs from 20-something-year-olds up to somebody who's almost 70. And when you look at, as you referenced, there's a lot of our congregations that have that as well. And bridging the generational divide is a major challenge no matter where you're at. And so I offer up a passage that I wonder if it could help, and I'd like your critique with the time that you've spent on it. In James chapter 1, there we know the passages between verses 22 through 25 that talk about looking into the perfect law of liberty and walking away and not forgetting what you look like. And the main principle there is living in reality. And maybe that could be a principle, and again, for your critique, that could help on both ends of that spectrum, right? If I'm a younger person, I'd like to still think I am. I know that that's in my past. My hairline proves that. But that I don't have all the answers, even though I'm young. I can't look at the Word of God, look at my life, and really think that I have answers that the people that are leading and guiding me have never had. Meanwhile, I can't be on the other side and be older and live in this reality that the world hasn't changed and that things are the way they've always been, and I don't have to look at the technological advances and so forth, can we use that principle of being able to look at the reality of both myself, the world around me, and how the Bible applies to me to help bridge that gap that I think is also a little bit what Brad was talking about?
Yeah, I actually think that the starting with self is, by looking in the mirror, is of most value. So there was a lot of sales work that I was a part of. It was in no way technical. I was not a scientist. But one of the things that I would talk to our salespeople about was oftentimes the way we enter the room is the way we'll leave it. And what I mean by that is the attitude, let's say you're in a negotiation or you're in some kind of an effort to move the needle on how somebody sees something. And if we immediately go to all the reasons they're going to hate it, the reasons they probably don't even want to talk to us, why this is a stupid idea, blah, 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 all that. And by the way, I know that they're a crook. I hate them. I can't stand those people. They're a problem every time they call, blah, 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 all that, right? It's going to end up that way. And it's because we didn't look in the mirror first. And so how we enter the room will be how we leave it. But if we enter the room with a lot of self-examination and humility, it sort of frees up, I think, our mind and our eyes to see where the other person is. And so, yeah, I mean, I think the onus is more on us, that we set the example of humility and pursuit.